Metaethics. Metaethics is the study of ethical language. What do we mean when we say something is good, bad, right or wrong? What is the meaning of moral judgments? How can we discuss what actions are right and wrong if you cannot define the word wrong? Cognitivists believe that ethical language can have a true meaning. The words we use can be meaningful because they have a factual basis. Morality is objective, deals with facts. There are objective moral values which do not depend on our beliefs, moral realism. Absolutist, moral statements can be established a priori. Non-cognitivists believe that ethical language cannot have a true meaning. Words cannot be meaningful because they are not subject to being true or false. Morality is subjective, judgments are just feelings or responses to situations. There are no objective moral values, moral anti-realism. Relativist, what determines good or bad are grounded in social custom. Cognitivist approaches, ethical language can have true meaning. Naturalism, Bradley, ethical statements and non-ethical statement, facts about the world, are the same. E.g., Hitler was a bad man, is verifiable as much as Hitler was the leader of the Nazis. Morals can be defined or explained in natural terms, through observation. Non-moral evidence such as pleasure and pain, or evidence of God's purpose in the natural world. Provable through empirical evidence. Subject to being true or false. E.g., euthanasia is right because it ends suffering of an individual, we can test its veracity, truth. Advocated by F. H. Bradley, ethical sentences express propositions, some such propositions are true, those propositions are made true by objective features of the world, independent of human opinion. Strengths and weaknesses of naturalism. Strengths. Based on what is natural so we can all experience it. Nature is universal so supports idea that morals can be universally known. Presents a solid guideline that ethics are the same for each situation. Weaknesses. Criticized by Moore, naturalism associates goodness with varying and contradictory properties. Defining goodness in terms of facts is mistaken, naturalistic fallacy. Is ought gap Hume can't move from an is to an ought. E.g., just because homosexuals can't reproduce doesn't mean homosexuality is inherently wrong. Naturalistic fallacy, can't move from way things are in nature to making a moral judgment. G. E. Moore stated that a naturalistic fallacy is committed whenever a philosopher attempts to prove a claim about ethics through appealing to a definition of the word good by using a natural property such as pleasing or desirable. Hume's fork, all statements are matters of fact or analytically true. Moral statements are neither. Right and wrong are subjective not objective, we need humans to exist to determine how we should live. Intuitionism, G. E. Moore. Goodness is not a natural feature of the world. We cannot use our senses to tell whether something is good, so we must use our moral intuition. Good is not a matter of opinion, but something that we can all ascertain through reason. An inner sense directs humans to know what is good. Ethical statements don't need defining because they are self-evident. Statements are cognitivist because they can be true or false. Therefore language can have true meaning. It's just not given meaning through empirical evidence. Our evidence for the true or false has to come from intuition, we just know. Goodness is an indefinable property of an action. When I say, stealing is wrong, I have a moral intuition that stealing is wrong. Moore argues that good is good, and that is the end of the matter. It is an indefinable and completely simple idea. Moore compares this to the color yellow. Yellow can only be known directly through intuition. Yellow is just yellow, and that's all there is to it. Moore did not think that we can prove an intuition, and it may be that our intuitions are wrong. H. A. Pritchard's Intuitionism. Moral obligations form immediate apprehensions, a bit like mathematics. We can see directly that 1 + 1 = 2 for example, without needing further explanation. Also includes a sense of obligation. Moral dilemmas involves weighing up contrasting obligations. Ought to do, has no definition, like yellowness, yet everyone recognizes what we ought to do in a certain situation. Strength of Pritchard, positive view of human nature, people have genuine obligations and duties to fulfill. Weakness of Pritchard, idea of duty is very subjective, not clear if there is a right way to solve dilemmas. W. D. Ross's Intuitionism moral principles are not absolute or defined in natural terms. Ross is a deontologist, thought that certain types of actions were always right. Ross developed the idea of prima facie duties, meaning, the duties we have at first sight. In any situation, we have duties which are apparent. We are bound by an important prima facie obligation unless there is some other compelling reason. E.g. justice, beneficence, self-improvement. Ross thought that we would choose between these on the basis of judgment. We do not have a logical system for working it out. In this sense, his theory is truly intuitive. What is right is always unique, depending on what is morally suitable for the situation. Weakness: what happens when intuitions conflict? Strengths and weaknesses of Intutionism. Strengths. Intuition has given a clear account of the meaning of good. In ethics, it is simple and known directly. Intuitionism does not prescribe a rigid morality, since it allows that our intuitive judgments may be wrong. Key ethicists More, Pritchard, and Ross are broadly in agreement. More's naturalistic fallacy seems persuasive: we can always criticize those who associate the good with something else. Pritchard and Ross's view that duties are self-evident gives a positive outlook on human nature. Weaknesses. Intuitionists have failed to agree on what the moral good is which supposedly is self-evident. More had a teleological view, emphasizing the promotion of happiness and the appreciation of beauty. Ross, however, emphasized duty. It is a highly individualist approach to ethics, does not give us concrete justifications for ethical behavior. All it claims is that goodness is indefinable. Intuitionism does not help us to resolve moral disputes and does not set out a clear decision-making process. Contrast this with utilitarianism, for example, which gives us the utility principle, the greatest good for the greatest number. What if one is ethically colorblind? What happens when intuitions conflict? More doesn't explain or prove how we know good through intuition alone. Moral intuitions seem to come from social conditioning and differ between cultures. Are they really objective truths? Non-cognitivist approaches: ethical language cannot have true meaning. Emotivism A. J. Hare and Stevenson. Ethical statements cannot be proven true or false, so they are non-cognitive. Stems from logical positivists: all metaphysical language is meaningless. Ethical statements cannot be tested using sense experience, they are not genuine truths but feelings. Hume argued ethics amounts to sentiments taken up by air. Morals are purely emotional responses. Air, verification principle: language is only meaningful if it can be verified either analytically or synthetically. Moral statements cannot. Ethical language is simply expressing our disapproval at something. It's just subjective feelings. Boo, hooray theory: when we say, lying is wrong, we are just saying boo to lying. However, in this theory it is not the case that all emotive statements are equal. Moral statements arouse feelings, but with three different strengths of command. So, implying a duty is the strongest form of statement. Saying that one ought to do something is less strong. Finally, merely stating that something is good, bad is very weak. This is all emotion, but it functions with different intensity. A. J. Hare, Critique of Ethics and Theology.
The presence of an ethical symbol in a proposition adds nothing to its factual content. Thus, if I say to someone, "You acted wrongly in stealing that money," I am not stating anything more than if I had simply said, "You stole that money." In adding that this action is wrong, I am not making any further statement about it. I am simply evincing my moral disapproval of it. It is as if I had said, "You stole that money," in a peculiar tone of horror, or written it with the addition of some special exclamation marks. The tone, or the exclamation marks, adds nothing to the literal meaning of the sentence. It merely serves to show that the expression of it is attended by certain feelings in the speaker. Chapter 6 of
The influence of logical positivism on emotivism. In the 1930s, a school of philosophy arose called logical positivism. Logical positivism considered science and logic to be the only legitimate sources of knowledge. For something to be called knowledge, it must be meaningful. The cornerstone of their beliefs was the principle of verification. This claims that a statement only has meaning if it is either analytic or empirically verifiable. It entails that statements about right and wrong are meaningless. They are neither true nor false, because they do not actually state anything. If I say, murder is wrong, this is not analytic, nor can any empirical investigation show this. We can show that murder causes grief and pain, or that it is often done out of anger. But we cannot demonstrate, in the same way, that it is wrong. Influenced by Wittgenstein's work, the Vienna Circle campaigned for a systematic reduction of human knowledge to logical and scientific foundations. Because the resulting logical positivism, or logical empiricism, allowed only for the use of logical tautologies and first-person observations from experience, it dismissed as nonsense the metaphysical and normative pretensions of the philosophical tradition. Ethical language as functional and persuasive. Hare developed Emotivism with the verification principle in mind. If we put ethical language to the test, it is clearly not tautological, e.g. the concepts of murder and wrongness are not synonymous. Therefore ethical language cannot be analytically true or false. It is also not possible to prove empirically whether a statement such as murder is wrong, is true or false. Any attempt to do so would commit the naturalistic fallacy. Therefore ethical language cannot be synthetically true or false. Therefore, if the statement is neither analytically nor synthetically true, it is meaningless. Hare holds that ethical language, although not logically meaningful, does have a purpose. An emotivist view gets round the logical positivist rules about what is meaningful, by claiming that moral statements are not factual, but express the feelings of the person who makes them. If you like something then you call it good, if you dislike it, bad. Thus two people can consider exactly the same facts and come to quite different moral conclusions. One cannot say that one is right or the other is wrong, because there are no facts that separate them. One can only accept that each is using moral judgments to express his or her emotional response to that set of facts. This approach was taken by C.L. Stevenson in his Ethics and Language, 1944. He was particularly concerned about how moral statements are used, and what results they are intended to produce. He claimed that the word good was a persuasive definition, it was there to express your emotions. On the other hand, if you tried to go on from there to give some reason why you felt that way, that is more than Emotivism will allow. One key question to ask in considering this theory is, how do emotions expressed in moral statements differ, if at all, from other emotions? Otherwise, moral statements are simply a listing of how we feel, and that does not seem to do justice to the way in which moral statements are actually used. I may sense that, when I say of something that it is right or good, I am doing more than simply describing my emotions at the time. What more am I doing when I make moral statements? Let us move to consider a second theory. Developed by C.L. Stevenson, there are such things as real disagreements in attitudes, rather than just differing emotions. Attitudes are based on beliefs, shaped by underlying convictions. Disagreements are not just different emotions, but also issues of different underlying convictions, what is life, its value etc. Strength of Stevenson gives more meaning to moral disagreement, whereas Hare only sees theses as conflicts of feelings. Strengths and weaknesses of Emotivism. Strengths. It highlights the reason why moral disputes are impossible to resolve decisively. It acknowledges the existence of moral diversity. It is true that moral opinions are often formed on the basis of gaining others' approval or avoiding their disapproval. History reveals many examples of emotivist methods of expressing moral views, e.g. Hitler's condemnation of the Jewish people. Hare's approach to ethics lacks the problem of speculative and metaphysical ideas, it is based on the observation of behavior, rather than God or timeless forms. It is easy to think of ideas which link with emotivism, people making moral claims with great emotional conviction and less proof. Stevenson is able to explain the complex meaning of ethical terms and gives some hope for resolving ethical disputes, because he emphasizes underlying beliefs and definitions. Everyone's opinions are equally valid. Weaknesses. Ethical statements are not usually judged according to the response of the listener but on the claims themselves. If ethical claims were contingent on emotions, they would change as emotions changed. Even when moral statements are carried by a weight of public emotion, that does not make them right or mean they should be adopted. Emotivism effectively prescribes complete freedom of action. How can we judge between two people's moral opinion? What makes one more valid than another? James Rachels criticizes emotivism for removing reason from moral judgments. In our morality we appeal to reason, as in any other aspect of life. In the case of terrible crimes, it seems inadequate to say that condemnation of these is just emotion. Surely something like genocide is intrinsically wrong. Peter Vardy criticizes Hare's Emotivism for being an ethical non-theory, because it only discusses emotion and does not really deal with the idea of actions being ethical at all. Hare's approach may be largely discredited since it proposed a method of analyzing the meaningfulness of language which it was itself unable to satisfy. Impact of Emotivism. Emotivism has become unpopular with philosophers because the theory that led the Emotivists to think that moral statements were meaningless has fallen from favor. Less technically, if expressing moral judgments is really no more than expressing one's personal opinion, there doesn't seem any useful basis for arguing about moral judgments. In practical terms, Emotivism falls down because it isn't very satisfying. Even, most philosophers think moral statements are more than just expressions of feeling. And it's perfectly possible to imagine an ethical debate in which neither party has an emotion to express. Prescriptivism. Richard Hare. Ethical language prescribes what ought to be done. This is universal and everyone in the same position would be advised to take the same course of action. Like imperatives that are orders and requests to be followed. Moral statements doesn't deal with facts, and is not true or false, therefore non-cognitivist, but they express our wills or wishes, imperatives. Moral issues move beyond our individual viewpoint in order to universalize a view. E.g., murder is wrong. Emotivists would say this is just our disapproval at murder. Prescriptivists would say this means you shouldn't murder, and neither will I by using the word good in an ethical way, is to use it prescriptively, what you ought to do. Mackey criticizes, morals are not universal, we want different things done to us, e.g. suicide bomber. Why should we follow one person's prescriptions more than another's? Implications. Impact. The idea that ethical language is non-factual is extremely radical. Are there no moral truths? The idea that we just know, right or wrong intuitively is really intriguing, but can we agree? Do we have to learn our morals through discussion and reason instead? Are these debates ultimately meaningless? For the emotivist, all we can do is recognize the power to persuade that lies behind moral statements, but we should not be deceived into thinking they have factual value. Should we all be allowed to make our own subjective, relativist moral values? Is it a good or bad thing that there are no moral absolutes? Thank you for watching. If you want this channel to upload more videos on A-level religious studies, please like this video and subscribe this channel.